We'll make a formal complaint, and I'll show you this cannot continue at all. We have a country. Yes, and we are part of the country. You know, we cannot have terrorism terrorizing the country and have officials in government terrorizing citizens. It's not acceptable.
Let's bring in our guest who is going to address that issue. The SA Media and Publicity, the spokesperson to the Edo State Governor, Mr. Bugi Okpebholo. He joins us virtually. Mr. Okpebholo, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you guys. Morning, everyone.
So let's say what we have heard from the ADC. They said he came to the state for a meeting because Olumide Akpata, the governorship candidate in the last election under Labour Party, is defecting to the ADC. So they came to welcome him, and then they made a stopover perhaps at the house of the former governor of the state, former national chairman of the APC, Chief Odige Oyegun, where we had Peter Obi and the rest of them. And then whilst they were inside, we understand there was a shootout, or there was a shooting rather. There were bullets on the ground, and then on that particular gate that they showed us, and then you heard the account of Peter Obi saying this was a literal attack or maybe assassination attempt. What is the account of the government as far as this issue is concerned? I just relayed their own position. What is the position of government?
Thank you very much. It's unfortunate that this is happening. The governor is not pleased with such an occurrence at all. It's an embarrassment, and I mean, the governor has put in so much effort and so much resources to ensure that we enjoy the peaceful, society and environment that we are currently enjoying. So scenes like this are not what the governor wants at all. It's not what he wants to see. And as usual, he has charged the security agencies to ensure they get to the bottom of what happened yesterday and fish out those responsible for this kind of action. We don't have the details. The security agencies will provide those details. But it's also very important that we expect people who come into the state and those who also reside in the state to do things properly, to ensure that in as much as there's freedom to do whatever you need to do, it's important that due process is also followed. Because I mean, if they had followed due process, for example, informing the security agencies that they were going to be having that event, getting security personnel on ground for their events, then we probably wouldn't have experienced things like this. We also appeal, the governor is also very concerned about the utterances of people like that and, players in spaces like this, to be careful about the things that they utter. While in the heat of emotion and excitement, you can say certain things, it's important that you think of the overall effect it has on the state and it has on the populace. To say that there was an assassination attempt, I think that was a bit heavy. And leaders should be responsible for the things that they say. From what we have seen from the initial pictures that we've seen and videos, we saw a couple of vehicles, that had been destroyed, and a few bullet cases on the floor. We don't know where they came from, but from what they said it was shot. I think that's far from an assassination attempt. While the governor has called on the security agencies to look into the situation, it's also very, very important that attention is paid to the internal crisis presently going on in the ADC. I mean, it's common knowledge that the ADC is not, they have crises that they are dealing with. Just, I think, day before yesterday or 2 days ago, there was a meeting in the same venue, Chief Odige's house, where a faction had come in there and had actually generated some ruckus, because from the things that we heard, they insisted that a certain faction seemed to be taking charge and isolating another faction. And then the next day we see things like this happen. So it's important that leaders are responsible to just come out to say, oh, the APC, the governor, it's very responsible, it's very uncharitable. And we will await the security agencies to bring out their reports. But of course, the state government and the party has nothing to do with that. they should look at their internal issues.
So let's speak directly to what is coming out from the ADC and the leaders. Mr. Peter Obi specifically said that this current administration is destroying democracy. The spokesperson of the ADC also alleged that, well, the governor had, quote, threatened and issued threats earlier on, so it's no surprise that this is happening. So that narrative is basically pointing the accusing finger at your government and the APC, which is why we want you to speak to that specifically now.
That's what I talked about earlier on. Leaders must be responsible. I mean, it borders on the fringes of irresponsibility for something to happen, and before the security report is out. I mean, you've already made the mistake of not carrying the security. If there were security men on ground at those events, what happened yesterday wouldn't have happened. So, I mean, that mistake had already been made. The process was followed.
To be fair, we saw some police officers, perhaps they attached to the individuals, but there are videos showing them. I want you to speak yes or no, so it's clear on record. Does the government or the APC in Edo State or wherever, does it have anything to do with this attack?
Definitely not. I already mentioned that earlier on. Definitely not. Governor Okpebholo does not practice that kind of politics. Governor Okpebholo is a very humble, peaceful, and simple man who has invested so much resources and efforts into ensuring we have a peaceful society. He will be the last person to. That's not his type of politics. That's not his type of person. Even in the last election that brought him in, with all of the antagonism, with all of the attacks, with all of the, he maintained that very peaceful nature that he's always been known for. So it's not the style. And making reference to the fact that the threat had been issued, I mean, maybe it's amnesia, but I mean, constant and several explanations have been given. That was an advice to prevent things like this. If high-profile individuals are coming into town, especially at the level of a former governor, it's just okay to inform the sitting government, to let them know, because you are high profile, naturally there will be some attention around your coming in, negative and positive. So government's advice at that time was to avoid things like this. But unfortunately, we don't seem to see the opposition. Elections are not won like this. These are familiar, I mean, this kind of skip making and are familiar things that people are used to, but this is not how you win an election. Something happens because of mistakes you made. You blame the government, maybe to whip off sympathy or something. But Governor Okpebholo does not play this kind of politics and has nothing to do with whatever happened within. Like I said, attention should be on their internal crisis, not necessarily the APC or the government that has nothing. Well, I mean, what does the government have to gain stopping somebody from moving into a new party? That's definitely not the case.
Perhaps we should, try to put things in proper context. There had been APC events in Edo State last year that were held in public places. I'm wondering if, the high-profile politicians elected and appointed who, were part of those events sought clearance from Governor Monday Okpebholo before they visited Edo State, and by extension, that is the reason that their visit and their security was guaranteed during their visit. So if the ADC chieftains had visited, informed Governor Okpebholo and got clearance from him, would their security have been guaranteed? Because we refer to July 2025, where Governor Monday Okpebholo, in a hostile manner at a public rally, had, told the LP presidential candidate at the time that his security can never be guaranteed should he visit Edo State.
Concerning the first part of your question, the APC in Edo State is a very organized party. Due protocol and due processes are followed. If the APC as a party is organizing an event, there's proper protocol that is followed. The invitees are properly notified. Arrangements are made for their coming. Security is provided and all of that. So if you are inviting people into the state, there's no need. They don't have to now be telling you they are coming to. But several leaders, national leaders, within and outside of the APC, who come into town for events and official events like this, extend that courtesy to the governor to let them know, I'll be in your state on so and so day, I'll be on your state. And the governor says, okay, what would you be needing? Can we extend any courtesies to you? So several of them do it. Like I said, it wasn't an instruction, it wasn't a threat, it was an advice that the governor gave to avoid things like this. things like this from playing out. So they should have just done the right thing. They should have just done what was proper, and that's informing the authorities that they will be in town for. It's not like I said. There's no. It doesn't mean if you come, something will happen, but just to be, to be safe, to ensure that we don't have things like this coming up. And that's why I'm happy you also raised that. That's the more reason why we're saying a lot of attention should be put on their internal crisis, because several other political parties and groups come into Edo State, have their events, they live peacefully, nothing happens. We have an opposition in town who play opposition, and nobody has been harassed, or nobody has had to suffer things like this. So attention should be placed in the correct direction.
All right, Boogie, let's talk about signaling and what I like to call signaling and messaging. And I'm sure you understand where all of this may be coming from. Now, the states or the Benin City, for instance, the notoriety of court-related activity, which the governor is fighting, we've seen him demolishing and maybe legislation. On the other hand, that rhetoric about he can't guarantee his safety, whether you call it an advisory or a warning, whatever, but the tone, the atmosphere which was said is now debatable. We can go on to talk about what the APC chairman had said, I think one of his interview in a sister station about hating Obi and all of that. We can talk about the Pedro Obaseki incident that happened in the state. We can go on to talk about where a gentleman, I think, slapped another gentleman in London, and when he came out, some prominent members of the party also were applauding him for what he did. I'm saying that there's a signaling of violence from that state. How is the government managing it? How do you intend to manage it differently? Because with these things I've listed, whatever happens, to just be like, look, they are notorious for this, which may not be the fact. So how do you manage it?
It's important we situate these things in proper context. All of these issues you've raised have different. I mean, appear in different contexts. Firstly, cultism has been dealt with in Edo State. There's no cultism in Edo State, so let's clarify that. Recently, we had little skirmishes, and with the way the governor went after it, we won't have any of that. So there's no cultism in Edo State.
Boogie, just hold on. You said there's no cultism in Edo State. Is that what you're saying? I want to be sure I heard you well.
That's what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying. You might have incidences, from time to time, but they're immediately dealt with. But in terms of cultism in the way it always was, where it thrived, where cult groups operated, cult groups don't operate actively in Edo State anymore. You might have one or two individuals. In fact, the last skirmishes that we had that seemed to have a semblance of cultism was actually tied to something else, not even directly cultism. So cultism is basically gone in Edo State. Concerning the rally, the governor, the tone in which you said the governor said what he said. Well, delivery is one thing, the message is one thing. You might have a problem with the delivery, but you can't guarantee how somebody delivers his message. At the end of the day, take the message. That's what's important. The governor gave that advisory in a political rally, in a campaign rally, and we know how the energy can be in those kind of places. Concerning the APC chairman, those were his personal remarks. They weren't a reflection of the party's position. So it's important we situate these things properly. You talked about the Obaseki. That had nothing to do with government. It was an incident that happened, outside of, and that matter is being addressed. The individual that was involved has been charged to court, and that's been addressed. So we don't have that perception. It depends on what you are saying. It depends on what you are seeing. It depends on the narrative you choose to follow. But the reality on ground under the leadership of Governor Monday Okpebholo is that Edo is relatively very safe.
You did
consider
Boogie, without trying to cut you, I mentioned one other thing that has to do with, I think I've forgotten the gentleman's name that was slapped in London at a forum or whatever, and then he came back to the States, and then some people who are close to the government were thanking him for doing a fantastic job of putting the guy straight.
It's important you separate governments from personal activities. You can't judge government from people's individual activities. The government did not release a statement congratulating anybody for this. The government did not. Whatever an individual does in his own personal capacity is up to the individual. So please, it's always important we separate government and governance and the governor from people's individual actions. Very importantly. So whatever anybody did in that direction is the person's personal issues, and anybody who feels that the wrong thing was done has the proper channels to express that grievance. Governor Monday Okpebholo is a very peaceful person. He's a God-fearing person, a man of deep faith. He doesn't practice, violent politics or violence in any form. And that's the look that the government has. So those were personal issues, the things that you have.
Well, I understand the need to put out positive messaging about the state, be optimistic, absolutely. And as a communicator, I'm sure that's something you're big on. But it's also important to be factual, right, and speak to the facts. So we know what we're facing. Yes, the governor is actively working to root out cultism. So that is a fact that then implies and obviously shows that there is still cultism being fought in Edo State. A matter of days ago, there were cultist-related arrests. Even the governor himself spoke and alleged that it's the ADC that is fueling cultism in Edo State, right? And then the demolition of buildings and all of that. So yes, the government is trying to ensure that cultism ends or fight cultism or what have you, but it's still a challenge being dealt with. So people don't just take your comment and go to town and say, oh, they said there's no more cultism in Edo State, while there's evidence even from the governor himself. But you said about the ADCs, well, what happened yesterday with the ADC, that they should look at their own internal politics. So are you implying that this attack came from the ADC? The ADC attacked itself?
I'm sorry, I have to dwell a little more on the cultism.
It's okay.
Situation. There is no society. There's no society that is totally devoid of crime. When you access the general crime situation or the general security situation of a location, you are looking at the ratio. You are looking at how preponderant that.
No, it was because you said there is no cultism in Edo State. You were categorical. You said there is no cultism.
Yes.
When we've seen recent arrests, even the governor has spoken to it about. Spoken about cultism himself. So it's just important to situate. You can give us a percentage. Is it 50%, 60%? But saying there is no cultism, that's where the issue is.
We're talking perception here and how the situation is viewed. If you go to a society like Saudi Arabia, you can relatively say Saudi Arabia has very low crime rates, but it doesn't mean one or two things don't happen. Compared to where we are coming from, where we actively dealt with the cultism situation in Edo State. I mean, we had a situation in the past where in the whole year you could have nothing less than 10 to 12 different cult wars. And in each of these cult wars, we're hearing scores, what they call scores. Scores refer to the number of people that are lost on each side of the warring parties. And we'll have situations where you hear that, the scores are 24-11. You hear 18-6. 18 people have died on one side, 6 people have died on one side. We have situations where in broad daylight, people were killed. Cultists they had a field day. Today, that cannot happen in Edo State. Like I told you, the last issue that even came up was even related more to, it wasn't even issues related to cultism. So based on what's on ground, based on the preponderance, based on how, rampant something is, we can conveniently say there's no cultism. It's not a major issue we are dealing with in Edo State. That's the most important thing. Then I can't categorically tell you the ADC is responsible for the crisis. The security agencies will do that job. But if we look at motive, I mean, they said there's a parable that says the old woman, the witch cried at night and the baby died in the morning or something like that. If we are going to look at where this is coming from, is the closest and most realistic point, not from an incident that happened the day before, where at this same location, a faction of the party, staged a certain protest. There was really a lot of opposition against what another faction was going, about how they were being sidelined. And then the next day, something like this happens. It's just very logical that should be the place everybody focuses attention on. So it's not my responsibility, or it's not the government's responsibility to say who was responsible, but from all that we have seen, it's very clear where we should be looking at. And when the security agencies are done with their investigations, they'll let us know the actual situation.
Bogi Okoimoy, Special Advisor to the Governor of Edo State on Media and Publicity, the spokesperson of Governor Monday Okpebholo. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much. Always my pleasure.